Hi, everybody. Chris and Randy here in Penang. Um, I was just getting ready and kind of prepping for this week on kids that were exceptional learners, and I realized my husband has had some diagnoses of some of these types of learning, and so we just decided, hey, we're going to interview him with just how he can share what it was like for him growing up as a kid in the States in the 60s and 70s, 1960s and 70s, with some unique learning needs. And so I thought I'd just ask him a few questions, have him share with you guys, and then you can find out a little bit from a first person perspective what it was like to grow up with some of those issues. So welcome, Randy.
Gracias.
Um, so what, tell us what was it like for you in elementary school?
Well, most elementary school wasn't that bad, but math was bad. And math has always been my worst subject. And I'm sure that has a couple different reasons, including the sad fact that I'm somewhat dyslexic. Not extreme dyslexic, but somewhat dyslexic. And so I see numbers backwards. My brain couldn't add numbers so well. Multiplication, and I can do all that stuff today, but I still struggle with division today. And long division, it's not pretty.
Um, what about like algebra? Was algebra
Algebra was terrible for me. It was far and away the worst. I was freshman in high school and junior in high school for Algebra 1 and 2. But I had geometry in between, and I did fairly well in geometry. And I hear that can be common for somebody who's been deals with some of the issues I deal with, that they do way better with geometry than with the weird concepts in algebra.
okay, that's interesting. What about doing sports? Were you able to have pretty good coordination as a kid going out
I,
to
I
sports?
love sports. I was mostly terrible at sports. Uh, I was the kid who uh, always sat on the bench. They didn't usually want me in a game. One time I finally got into a football game after about 5 games, and they're like, go on the line and block. And I'm like, "Mm." And so I just ran out and I actually caught a pass. And not only did I catch a pass, I scored a touchdown. Yay!
Yay!
Except I ran the wrong way.
Oh no.
Literally.
So when you're supposed to go this way, you went that way.
Yes, I caught the pass and I just ran from the same way.
Oh shoot. Oh man. So your teachers knew you had dyslexia or like
Yes, I was constantly going and seeing specialists. There was a couple of, I don't know if you'd call them counselors or whatever they were, but I'd see them once a week or once every 2 weeks, and they'd come in and specially work with me. Funny story is, oh, I don't know, maybe the second grade. Um, my parents put me in a special school for hyperactive because I was also extremely hyperactive.
okay,
Uh,
ADHD.
yeah, not a little bit hyperactive. I was very hyperactive, and so they put me in the special school. I think it's still in Miami to this day, called the Elliott School. The last time I was in Miami, or one time when I was in Miami back in the 90s, I checked and it was there. So they put me in this special school for hyperactive kids. And I was so hyperactive that I would get all the other kids wound up. And so they had to kick me out of that school,
Oh my goodness.
back to the regular public school.
So what kind of things would you do in class that showed the teachers that you had ADHD? Like, you know, what kind of things were hard for you that other kids it wasn't hard for?
Oh, well, I could never sit still. I'm always, well, you can't really see it, but I'm always, moving, touching.
Your
Um,
feet are moving, your
yeah.
hands.
Reading was always hard. So that wasn't helpful. Actually, I pretty much hated reading growing up until I got saved and started reading the Bible. And it's like, oh, here's something I actually, and I liked history. which actually required quite a bit of reading. But my reading skills were such that I would, and to this day, I can do the same thing. I'll read a chapter and I'll get done and I'm like, what did I just read? And I'll have my mind somewhere else completely. Just I can read every single word, but completely be thinking on other subjects at the same time. Uh,
But with the Bible, you have been able to remember
yeah,
more.
I mean it's can still be a challenge to not do that very thing, but I like it way more than any textbook I ever read. Uh,
Now, did they give you any kind of medication for the ADHD?
oh yes,
Would you be willing to talk about that?
first my mom just tried some general over the counter stuff, but they they tried a couple different things on me. The main one was a drug called Dexedrine. I don't even know if it's still available today, but it is actually speed, which sounds crazy.
So it's an amphetamine. It's an
Yes, it's
actual
an amphetamine, it's a stimulant, but the theory is that there's a part of my brain and other people who are ADHD whose brain is that part of their brain is working too slow. And so if you give them speed, it speeds up the whole brain, including that section. And so it was helpful. My grades went up. Um,
Could you sit still? Could you focus more? Or?
Well, to some degree, yeah. I mean, it didn't help at all with things like coordination and it didn't help me with math, no matter what. Math just didn't get there. But it helped. And then they thought they'd try a sister drug of dexedrine, which is called Dexamol. I don't know what the difference is, but it wasn't as effective. And then they tried barbiturate called methrobamate, I think was the name of it, and that would just drug me. That would,
You would be too
yeah, I
tired.
couldn't function with that stuff. So dexedrine was the best. Um,
Now, one of the things that we've been learning about kids that are ADHD is it's very hard for them to tune out other sounds. Like if there's distracting sounds of cars going by or dogs barking. Did you find that was the case for you? Like if the teacher's up front talking, was it hard for you to attune to that sound? Would you hear all the other sounds too a lot or?
that's too far back for me to remember that
Yeah.
specifically. Um, and I mean, in Miami, the biggest sound was heat. Because the school, my first 4 years in it and kindergarten stuff was not air conditioned. Um, my last year and a half, they put in 6 classrooms that were air conditioned
Oh, so the
for the
sound
sixth
was,
graders. So I got into that my last. But you were always dealing with the heat. Um,
oh, so you said the sound. Do you mean
yes.
the
No.
sound of the heat?
No. No. It was the heat itself
A
was
distraction.
yes a distraction.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
But
Wow.
I was a troublemaker from the word go, and some kids thought I was amusing. Most kids didn't want to be around me.
Kind of like class clown. Or,
Yeah. No, not really class clown, just maybe class nerd or something, class stranger. Um, and, most kids didn't want to be around me. But I didn't mind that because I was an introvert. I still am an introvert. So that doesn't really bother me that much. But the whole thing was challenging. Athletics, I was terrible at for the most part. There was one athletic position I could play and do pretty good in, and that was hockey goalie. And hockey goalie, not so much on the ice because who learns how to skate in Miami in the 60s? The biggest ice was an ice cube. Um,
did you move to a cold place? Is that
yeah,
what?
we did, but um, I was very good at street hockey at one position at goalie, and the reason was I had extremely fast reflexes, and even as however old I was, 30 something, I had better reflexes than most high school sports stars. And that we've actually tested that in Seattle at the Seattle Science Center, but against two high school sports stars from the town I used to live in. I won't tell you the whole story, but my reflexes were always better than theirs, on these reflex testing machines. So I had great reflexes, but I couldn't see anything coming at me. I would always lose sight. Even a basketball, somebody throws, I never see it. I'll see it when it's first moving, but then I just have to. I was good at judging angles, and so I could throw my arm out to where I expected it to go, but I never once. They always say, "Don't take your eye off the ball." Watch the ball hit the bat. Watch the ball into you. I couldn't do that, no matter how hard I tried. I just would lose sight of it constantly, which is, when you're supposed to be playing baseball or whatever, that's a bad thing. But in hockey, my reflexes were so fast that if I played goalie, um, I was always the first guy selected because
Wow.
I was such a good goalie, not because technique or anything else. It's just I had really fast reflexes.
Now, when I met you, you were in an adult baseball league or softball league,
Softball,
and you
yeah.
were good. You were good at catching and,
I know, but most of the girls on that team could out hit me.
oh, okay.
I
So
mean, I could hit, but I couldn't hit far. I
okay,
still probably couldn't hit
you were pretty
far.
good at fielding.
Yeah, I was good at fielding, and I mean, I loved it. I was always the dirtiest guy on the field. I was up, and you can ask Chris. I'm always dirty. I'm a very hands-on, touchy-feely
Yeah,
type
yeah.
guy.
Now,
Um,
let me ask you about this. Did you ever have an intelligence test or like a test that checked your aptitude, your brain ability as a kid? Do you know if you ever had that?
I had tons of tests. I couldn't tell you specifically what they were. On my last high school report card, it says I have a ridiculously high IQ. I
Okay.
think I've showed that to you.
So in other words, even though you had dyslexia, even though you had ADHD, your intelligence was very high.
Yes, yeah.
That's so interesting. Now, let me ask you something else. Have you found, like working at UPS, when you would deliver packages or inside the warehouse when you worked, did you find that your dyslexia was a hindrance or a help? I'm
Oh,
curious.
it's always a hindrance, or usually a hindrance, because you're looking at numbers backwards. A lot of packages you'd see if it said like Freightliner, you knew it could only go to one of four places because there's four big Freightliner truck manufacturing plants near me. So that wasn't hard. But like when I was out delivering packages, I would often write the address down wrong. If it's 6707 North Basin Avenue, then I'd write 76 on the
Oh, wow.
record, and then your boss gets mad because you mislabeled that package, and technically it's a lost package if the the shipper ever wants to go to prove that we delivered it for them.
So did you learn adaptations like to double check or triple check?
It didn't really help that much. Um, like today, probably my biggest obstacle is typing. Um, my handwriting is atrocious. I have no artistic skills, but typing is still a problem. I almost always have to be looking at the keyboard. Probably 80% of the time, I have to be looking at the keyboard. And there's words like the word there, Their. No matter how many times I try, I misspell it.
That's so interesting.
Even when I'm trying as hard as I can, most of the time it still comes out misspelled.
Yeah.
Um,
And you know it. You just said it properly, but when you go to do it,
right,
something.
right.
Um,
And that's not the only word, but that's
Now, something that I have seen that is a gift you have is a high mechanical aptitude of being able to fix things and a really good at photography. And do you feel like that has anything to do with the dyslexia? Have you heard about anything about that or?
I haven't. Maybe the photography is a possibility because I do see things from different angles that most people never even think about looking at when they're behind the lens of a camera. But so that's my best part of photography is my use of angles in my pictures. But like on front brakes or even back brakes of vehicles, I'd have to jack up both sides of the vehicle at the same time. Um, because I always had to be able to go to the other side and look and make sure I was putting things back together properly.
That's
But
smart.
that was hard because, your front left brake and your front right brake, they assemble exactly opposite. And
Right.
so for a dyslexic guy to be looking at things exact, that was quite hard. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes I'd have to go 10 times to the other side of the vehicle before I could get a set of brakes together.
No, I've heard that sometimes people with dyslexia can have unusually high spatial orientation. You were able to drive big trucks, but drive UPS long truck. I mean,
Mhm.
sometimes,
Yeah,
and didn't you have part of your job was parking these things in the
yeah,
yard, right, for years? And so, like, I am horrible at spatial
she
orientation.
is.
That's one of the multiple intelligences. We park a car at a mall, and I have no idea where the car is. I try to tell us to get out, and I'll be like, go right. And Randy will be like, okay, I think we need to go left then. So I'm super bad at it. But I remember when we were dating and you would go to deliver packages, sometimes they would give you all the miss sorts. Like in Northwest Portland on the hill, um, there would be people that could not, UPS drivers that could not find these houses, and they give them to you, and you would figure it out because you would like, I don't know, somehow you had an ability to like see around all angles, and you would
Yeah, I,
find stuff.
I can't really explain that, but yeah, I'd often get the trouble packages, the misdelivered packages. Um, so that was true. The first time I ever got in a UPS truck, it was older than me by quite a bit, and it had been a delivery truck. Now it was just a driver training truck. And the first time I ever went and took a test drive in a UPS truck, like we're driving up kind of narrow, but not super narrow road, and he goes, "I want you to parallel park right there." And so I pull up past the car, crank it into reverse, the stick shift, and I did it absolutely perfectly. And I was shocked, and he was shocked. He goes, "I can't believe you just did that. Never having driven a big truck before. Do it again." And I did it a second time. Now, that's not always the case with me in backing up. But
Just really good, knowing like how much space there
yeah,
is and figuring it out. And
yeah.
yeah,
When,
super
when
good.
I started becoming what's called a trailer shifter, moving trailers around the yard, 28 to 53-foot long trailers, um, it took me about 3 or 4 days before I could really get good and figure out how to back these things into these spaces that to me looked tiny when you first began. And you'd be between two trailers with this other massive, maybe you'd be have a 53 footer between two 28 footers, but they're the same width. And once I learned the secrets, once they properly instructed me and I got a little practice, I wouldn't do it with my eyes closed, but as the saying goes, I could have done it with my eyes closed.
Now, Randy, didn't you end up becoming the head of transportation for YWAM Kona?
Yeah, last time I checked,
Yeah.
as if you didn't know.
Well, they don't know, but so you had to end up training 18-year-olds to 30, 40-year-olds to drive like these big 15-foot vans
Yeah, yeah.
and vehicles. And didn't you do that for quite a while?
Yeah, I did that for a long time, and it's UPS was really good at training their people, and so I took a lot of that training. I made it my own because at UPS you have to spend 40 hours in the classroom or in a parking lot before they'll let you drive their truck on the street to take a road test. And so they're very intense about training. So I would um, break that down to an hour to an hour and a half. And then I'd go out sometimes with, 6 or 8 people at a time at most. I tried to only do like 4 at most, but you just never know what happens. Um, and they'd be like, "How did you do that?"
With teaching the YWAMers, you
Yes,
mean?
teaching the wirers, they're like, "How can you back that thing up so easily?" And so that was one thing I was good at, or
Yes,
became good at, without much effort.
teaching all these
But yeah,
kids.
they had no idea. Most of them, they think driving means you jump into your little cool Honda or whatever and have no idea how to actually drive safely and keep proper distance. And,
Yeah.
you know, they might have a driver's license, but that doesn't mean much.
And then another thing about Randy that I think people with dyslexia end up being good at is a mechanical aptitude. So I've known you, 30 years, and the whole time you've been good at fixing things. And so, how is it that like he can go into a house where something's been broken for years, of a relative or something, and he'll look at it and go, "Oh, have you tried this?" And they'd be like, "What?" And he would like fix it in minutes. This would happen regularly. And so, like,
That, as far as building goes, I I don't have that much building skill. I have a little bit of repair skill. You don't ever want me to try to build something square for you.
like construction,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
lumber.
You don't want that. That would not be pretty.
But
Uh,
fixing things that are broken in a house, you can
yeah.
troubleshoot. You have an unusual ability. And then also, they ended up having Randy fix things that were broken on like automobiles and trucks and cranes and front end loaders on the huge YWAM Kona campus. And so he had never been trained in mechanics in his life to fix things, but he's a kinesthetic learner. But somehow with this dyslexia, there's a thing to be able to think on all sides. He could see like all sides of something. And so he was able to like fix engines and just had a knack. I mean, how did that, when did you start getting that?
Well, I had to get it when I got my first vehicle, which had belonged to my oldest brother, and the engine blew up in it, and he didn't want it anymore, so he sold it to me. And I had to figure out how to get the engine out and put a working engine in it.
And how
Uh,
old were you?
oh, I don't know, 18, 19. Um, and fortunately, I had a neighbor who was good. He actually eventually became an auto mechanic at a local car dealer. But he and I would just we'd buy the book. You know, they used to have these things called the manual, and they would carefully explain how you can do X, Y, and Z. You know, now it's all online. But they would carefully explain it. If you followed it step by step, and if I could talk to my neighbor who was younger than me but much more experienced in working on cars, so he taught me stuff. Another neighbor taught me stuff. My dad was very good at fixing things,
Yeah,
so maybe that's where I got that
yeah.
from.
And then when we joined the YWAM Kona campus, he became not only the head of transportation and fixing automobiles, but he was a Bible instructor. So he was creating the teacher reflections for our Bible curriculum that Melissa shared with us. That's now part of the Bible Entering God's Presence .org. But I remember one day Randy brought in a front end loader as part of a Bible lesson for the fifth and
No,
sixth
it was a
grade.
John Deere tractor.
Oh, John Deere
Yeah.
tractor. And he comes in, this is Bible class with 10 and 11-year-olds or 9 and 10-year-old boys and girls. And you tell him like that was a pretty cool analogy. He drives this big front end loader in this big steel machinery,
Uh,
pulls up behind our school on the grass,
mhm.
and then what was it you said?
Well, I told them that when I had come to Kona, I had never even dreamed of working on something like this. But they had a big manual for this thing,
The
and
book.
yeah,
You could read the book.
the instruction manual to repair it. And so I would look in the book, and I'd take a good shot at what the problem was, and I'd follow the instructions carefully, slowly, and more often than not, it would work. And I compared that to the Word of God. And how the Word of God is the instruction manual for our lives, for our hearts, for our relationships. Um, I don't remember what other
Yeah,
analogies I made, but
so
yeah.
good. Yeah. And now it might not be a physical manual. He might be watching YouTube videos that explain how, but he's looking at people who figured out how to do it, reading it, observing, learning,
Mhm.
and then turning around and applying it, just like the word. We don't want to just be hearers of the word only, but to do what it says. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Okay. Ciao. Enjoy your last week.